Today I'd like to speak to you on a God of peace and God of peace. Okay? So would that make them two different meanings? I don't think so. Some years ago when I was a school nurse, a young lady, I was very close to this young lady, I really admired her. She was a wonderful person. And she had recently gotten married. And she came to me one day kind of upset because she and her husband had a little bit of a falling out. And I don't think it was anything grand, but she was what we call saved in certain churches, you know, where you know you're going to heaven. There's no doubt about it. But the thing was, she was trying to convince her husband that he had to become what she was. He had to attend that church and get himself saved. But she wasn't able to convince him, and I think it caused a little bit of a rift with him. So anyway, she came to me and she told me, she said, I've got to, you know, I'm trying to talk to him, I'm trying to get him to get salvation, I'm trying to get him to get saved, and, you know, he's not listening to me and we're not able to get there. And she said, so I have a soul burden. I said, a soul burden? I've never heard that before. In all the years I've heard anything, I've never heard anybody with a soul burden. And she said it was kind of like she was explaining to me if she didn't get him salvation, her own salvation was in jeopardy. And so she wanted to know what I thought about it. And I told her, I don't have a soul burden, and you don't either. There's no way you can save anybody's anything, including in a way, I'm going to say your own, because we're all under the will of God. Even though we have free will, we are within the parameters that God gives us to work with whatever we have to work with. So I didn't hear any more from her about that soul burden, and I hope she didn't follow up with it, because I have a hunch that could have been the end of a very good marriage. But it strikes me that there are so many different ways of viewing how we worship God and what we attach to what we're doing when we worship God. Now, another couple, and they weren't in any way a couple, but they came into my office, and this young man was very well dressed in a suit, and there are certain religions where I see the men dressed like that all the time. And he was very conservative looking and very calm and peaceful. The lady who came in with him was an older lady. This young man was probably in his early 30s. This lady was about my age, and I'm not going to tell that. But anyway, they came in and they had already started having this conversation about how to worship God. And the lady was saying, you have to worship God out of fear. That's the way you worship God. And the man was saying, you worship God in reverence. And the lady kept pushing and pushing, and he was steadfast in what he was saying. He was just standing there calmly reiterating his statement that you worship God in reverence. And she kept saying, no, it's in fear. And what I noticed about the two of them was that he was extremely calm. He was steadfast in his conviction, and she couldn't sway him. But the other thing was, she actually looked afraid. She actually looked as if somehow she had a soul burden for this man, and she had to convert him to who she was. And I didn't see it happening because he looked very much convinced of who he was and grounded. So if I had a question about somebody possibly losing a soul, it would have been her trying to persuade him, because I don't think he was going anywhere. So that gets me to this aspect of what a peace of God looks like. It looks like we've decided that certain things have to be a certain way. And so what that does is When we have that kind of peace of God, this is what we have. It stops being the peace of God. It becomes something else. It becomes fragmented. It becomes separated and distant from one another. It is not what I think, now this is just me, what I think the highest form of worship is. Because to me, the highest form of worship is not fragmentation of God. It's the recognition that it can be looked almost any way by anyone. Now, there are some religions that can look, or let me say some individuals, who can look upon a broad spectrum of religious beliefs and ideologies and still see that there's something that can tie one thing into the other. And then there are some people who cannot, under any circumstances, conceive of anything that is attached to what they have. Even these small fragments of God are so magnificent, so incredible, so remarkable, so blinding, that when we have that little fragment, we cannot conceive that it's anywhere else as great or wonderful or magnificent as what we have. And we want to guard that jealously. Not only do we want to guard it, but we want to make sure everybody else has the same thing, but just not the same thing that we have in our clutches. And so we're constantly out there pushing and shoving all over the globe to bring everybody into this one little locked up box of what we say God is. And the truth of it is, none of us can say what God is. We can only give the aspect that we think is the correct version of God. And so we're constantly at this reverence, fear thing going on. And so what is, if we could kind of separate the light from the darkness, if we want to call reverence light and fear darkness, on one side we have these opponents, one against the other, and they're all giving each other negative names for what is the one thing. And so on one side you have this fear that creates the hatred, that creates the jealousy, that has the wrath of God, the pain of God. All of those are God. They really are. There are some places where we need to be, I won't use the word jealousy, but fearful. I mean, if a bear is coming at me, I'm getting out of the way. There's no way I'm going to stand there and call myself standing up to this kind of fear. Fear has a purpose. It means move. And I want to say hatred too, because there are things or acts we should hate. Not necessarily the individual. That's something that some people can do. I won't tell you I can always do that. But I am saying that if we can separate the act from the individual, maybe we can come closer to this peace, P-E-A-C-E of God, rather than this P-I-E-C-E of God that we've torn up. Because I truly believe that before all of this strife occurred, we had the whole thing. And maybe in some religions, that's what you call the fall, where everybody separated, spoke their own language, started looking different, moving all over the globe, and coming to their own conclusions about what they needed to do or be to, get closer to God. So, in saying that, all of these names and phrases, my first name is Marvene. My husband called me Marvene, my close friends call me Marvene, and my grandkids call me grandmama, my son says mama. Some people say I'm Miss, Mrs., Ms., And then there are some people who call me names I won't repeat it here. But they're all talking about me. And to some degree, there's a certain aspect of all of that that is true. Maybe, I guess. Maybe not the last part, the worst part. But we have to look at it that just because this is a word we use, this is the way we see it, that doesn't have to be the only way it is, not only for God, but for us as well. And so I tend to try to move my thinking from the fear of God, which is what I actually grew up with, and start to moderate that thought and move more towards the center. Now, I don't have to get all the way over to the right either. Somewhere in the center, everything is put together. And it's a cohesive branch. It's harmony. And it's where all of us really are. Although we may manifest in one way or the other at different times. And that's the way God appears to us. And to us, depending on how we see things intellectually or emotionally, that may be the aspect of God that we worship. But it doesn't mean there aren't other aspects out there. If God is the Alpha to Omega, then that means everything from one extreme to the very center is God. And the truest balance is in the center. The most lucrative place is in the center. And this is where we need to work to get. Now, the thing about me tearing this up doesn't mean it was torn up. God's never torn up. And if you pay attention, it can actually be put back together. And sometimes the place where it is put back together is actually stronger than where it was before it was torn. If you've ever seen a wound heal, a lot of times that's the strongest part. And so the fact that we've got all of this separation going on tells me that there's a lack of willingness on the human level to try to put this thing back together. And not put it together, just see the connections. You see, if we look at this as a puzzle, everybody's got a piece, okay? And all of the pieces are different. And not all of them interlock with one another at the same spot. There's a puzzle piece over here that will match this puzzle piece. But this one might not match this, that one up there. It may match this one over here. And so as we start putting our pieces together and recognizing the other three sides don't have to match this one piece, the center piece, that there's a piece above, there's one to either side, and there's one below, and maybe two or three somewhere else. And as this puzzle, this center starts to fill out, it radiates out, and we have everybody filling out the whole map, which is God. So much for our soul burdens. You know, anybody who wants to walk around feeling guilty about somebody else's soul, help yourself. I'm not going that route. I'm doing enough work keeping myself together, you know. And honestly, when I first heard her say that, I thought, what in the world? Where did she get that from? You know, but she was convinced, and most of us are convinced. And all of us are right, and all of us are wrong. Somewhere in the middle is where we need to be coming. And I think the middle needs to be in the hardest fighting countries in the world. That's where you need the middle. You also need it in all the countries that aren't fighting. They need to project the positiveness of God into that place. And we need to do that all the time, because if they cannot come to a conclusion, sooner or later, we'll have difficulty coming to conclusions, not only in our own countries, but in ourselves. We start picking sides and thinking we have to go from one extreme to the other. You don't. Somewhere in there, someone knows, and I will call it God, how to do this. And all we need is people with enough constitution, enough backbone, enough wisdom, enough spiritual groundedness to start the process and make it work. Now, frankly, I know someone I believe can do it, but I just have to wait and see. But we do still have our pieces of God, and we will for a while, but eventually it'll get to this.